Part 11. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Xiao. Chapter 106. Idiot, why did you bring me to this hellish place? Looking at the playground in front of him, Su Tong suddenly had a bad feeling in his heart. The amusement park was pitch dark, with some sporadic emergency lights flashing, and it looked so lifeless that it made people feel twisted inside. The doll also seemed aggrieved. His huge eyes were staring at the park in front of him, with fear on his face. He flapped his wings and wanted to take him away. But no matter how he flew, the result remained the same. As long as he lowered his altitude, what remained in front of him was the gate of the amusement park. Seeing that he couldn't get out, Su Tong could only let go of the little guy and try to let him fly out to see if he could fly out, but he never came back. Oh, reality. The corner of his mouth twitched a few times, and he walked to the door and looked at the entrance shaped like a big dog's head. I turned around and looked behind me, only to see a gray sky behind me, with the shadows of tall buildings appearing and disappearing, but it gave people a hazy and false feeling, as if there was a special power that isolated this world. Let alone an evolved person, not even a shadow of an infected person could be seen. Seeing this, he simply didn't leave. He took the electric leopard man's brain crystal from the prop book in his hand. The brain crystal flashed with golden arcs, the size of a thumb. In fact, the strength of the electric leopard man is not bad, but he was attacked by Su Tong first. If you give him a little more time, wait for the countdown above his head to end, and enter the next point of evolution. As an evolver with lightning ability, there is huge room for improvement. It's a pity that he met himself. I wiped it a few times and threw it into my mouth casually. It still tasted salty, but this time there was no such big reaction as before. I only felt waves of numbness in my body, but it felt quite comfortable. You have eaten the best brain crystals, and your physique is improving. As the prompt sounded in his ears, he opened his hands and saw countless tiny electric currents flowing from his hair. These tiny electric currents were like fish in the water. After quickly traveling through his hair, they all gathered in the eyeball in his palm. As if being absorbed by this eyeball, a white arc flashed from time to time in the pupil of the eyeball. This tingling feeling quickly disappeared before he could taste it carefully. At the same time, I also received news from the script world. The temporary evolution has been completed. The overall physical fitness has been temporarily increased by 10%. Your evolver ability Eye of Thunder has been upgraded. Please try it yourself for the specific effect. Only 10%. Hearing the prompt, Su Tong couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. Although Yan Niang had told him that the boosting effect of brain crystals would continue to decay, he was still disappointed that the effect was only 10%. But even so, he still felt that his strength had increased a lot. And at this moment, the arc of electricity flashing in his palm seemed to be more dazzling than before. With this layer of blessing, I finally have some confidence to face the next round of infected evolution. He raised his head and glanced at the gate of the amusement park. He raised his eyebrows and actually took out a large cardboard box from the prop book and put it under his butt without any intention of going in. Continue to find food from the prop book and put it in front of you. He's not being pretentious, he's really hungry. The side effect of the enhanced physical fitness is that I can eat and drink more, and I get hungry very quickly. I struggled for half the night without eating or drinking. My stomach was empty and I felt very uncomfortable. Since you can't get out of here for the time being, infected people from outside can't get in either. In such a nice place, shouldn't you sit down and take a rest? I saw pieces of food being taken out and placed in front of him. He got a lot of good things from Aunt Wang, including canned beef, frozen beef, and mutton rolls, and large barrels of Master Kong. In addition, before he entered the world of scripts, he also bought 2 beef patties and a self-heating small hot pot in front of his house. So, gilug. After a while, The self-heating hot pot began to steam, and bursts of aroma wafted out of the pot. The original butter from canned beef is used as the soup base, and Master Kong's seasoning packet is added, and the aroma is simply amazing. The originally meager ingredients of the small hot pot suddenly became abundant with Su Tong's tinkering. Large chunks of beef, fragrant and soft, and a bite of beef patty. The solid and rich taste brings satisfaction and pleasure to the tongue. At this moment, with a sip of Fat Boy's happy water, all worries are gone. Su Tong was feasting, but a cool breeze blew up from nowhere in the paradise. The cool breeze blew along the carousel, and the wind chimes on it jingled. A blood-red hanging rope was hanging on it, swinging back and forth. However, the rope disappeared in the next second, as if it had never existed from beginning to end. There was only a drop of blood dripping along the bracket of the Trojan. Call. The wind became stronger and stronger, picking up the sand and dust on the ground and blowing it out of the park. Su Tong, who was eating hot pot, was blinded by the sudden strong wind. Suddenly Su Tong's throat tightened, as if something grabbed his collar and pulled him back hard. The huge force did not allow him to resist. When he came to his senses, he suddenly realized that the person dragging him was actually Yan Niang. Look at that. Yan Niang raised her head and motioned him to look forward. Su Tong raised his head and couldn't help but froze there. The entrance gate of 50-meter paradise in front was where he had just eaten hot pot, but it was different from what he saw just now. There were actually several corpses hanging on the gate of the paradise, including infected people and ordinary people. Each person was strangled by a hanging rope and hung in the air. It's a shame you didn't go in, otherwise I wouldn't be able to save you. She stared at the gate of the paradise in front of her. Her dark green pupils seemed to be looking through the gate to the deepest part of the courtyard, but no one knew exactly what she saw. What's in there? Su Tong touched his neck and looked at the corpses. He couldn't help but feel a little disgusted, but he was more curious about this paradise. It seems that there are still some unknown things in this doomsday background script. Have no idea. Yan Niang shook her head. There are many things in this world that cannot be explained clearly, and those who ask for the bottom of things often do not end well. With that said, he threw the bag with the fat paper to him, urging Su Tong and himself to leave as soon as possible. Let's go. I've been a little uneasy lately. It seems like the call from the west has become much weaker. Speaking of northern Yan Niang, there would always be a somewhat confused look on her face. She didn't know the source of that call. But I just feel that it is something very important to me. The west is so far away, and we are not Tang Santang, so why should we walk there with our feet? Su Tong stood behind and stuffed the ham sausage in his hand into his mouth. His cheeks were bulging, but his eyes were staring at the display cabinet of the store next to him. Hearing this, Yan Niang turned around suspiciously and saw him pointing at the motorcycles placed in the display cabinet beside him. Looking at Yan Niang with blazing eyes, perhaps you don't know, ever since I completed the feat of drifting around corners on my bicycle, my teacher has often said that one day my name will be on the tombstone on the Isle of Man. The midday sun bakes the earth, as if the whole world has turned into a huge oven. An infected person was walking on the edge of the road. His whole body exuded a strong putrid odor, and white maggots were crawling up and down his head. The empty eye sockets seemed like two black holes of thinking, meditating on a philosophical question about himself and even about the universe. Who am I, where do I come from and where am I going? Staring at the sun above his head, he suddenly waved his palms like an angry child and made a strange and piercing cry towards the sky. Buzz. Suddenly, there was a violent roar behind him. The infected person stiffened and slowly turned around. Following a roaring roar, his eyes were suddenly covered by a group of black tires. Time seemed to pause at this moment. The blue and white car logo reflects the metallic texture in the sunlight. The bodies of men and women wearing helmets in the car were close to each other. The strong wind blew up the woman's black dress, revealing her slender thighs and pink lace piping. A doll was hung behind the car, with a chubby face. The little meat had been blown out of shape by the strong wind. There was a sound of bang. The infected person may never have dreamed that he would be able to complete the Thomas twist, the most difficult movement in the history of gymnastics, one day after his death. Boom! The black rubber wheel hit the ground hard, causing the anti-shock spring of the wheel to be compressed to the extreme. It left a friction mark on the ground and then quickly drove away. Su Tong looked at the right hand on his left shoulder and threw it to the ground. The hour hand on the speedometer was already pointing to 200, but he had no intention of slowing down. Even small cracks on the bad national highway would always cause the car to vibrate strongly. This is a fatal threat to any driver. But fortunately, Su Tong's strength is strong enough, and the super control bonus also plays a supporting role at this time, and he can completely suppress this shaking. Occasionally, you will see some lone infected people on the road, but when they notice Su Tong and the others, the car has often left them far behind. Stop. At this time, Yan Niang suddenly felt something, patted Su Tong on the shoulder, and asked him to stop the car. Squeak. Accompanied by the sound of brakes, the car slid on the road for a full 300 meters before finally slowly stopping. Vomit. As soon as the car stopped, the doll tied in the back immediately vomited. Looking at the pink liquid he vomited, Su Tong once wondered if this guy had vomited out all his brains. After Yan Niang jumped out of the car, Su Tong instantly felt two groups of icy coldness on his back. He knew without looking that there were two round watermarks there. Over there. Yan Niang stood on the side of the road. She closed her eyes and could feel the strong call in front of her. She pointed to the west and turned back to Su Tong, "We can't drive anymore. Let's walk the rest of the way." Su Tong raised his head and threw away his helmet. When he glanced at the road sign, he saw a few big characters written on it, 3 kilometers from WL City. Infinite script killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 107. WL City is a provincial capital center city in this world. There are many tall buildings, shining like a pearl sitting on the ground. However, those splendid histories have been lost forever in the long river of time. Now this place has a new name, the Nest. You want me to come into this place with you? Su Tong was lying on the ground, looking at the infected people on the street in front of him. He frowned slightly. There are too many. On the provincial road in the distance, a large number of infected people can be seen gathering towards the city in front of them. Yes, as my tribute. Yan Niang knelt down and looked at Su Tong carefully. There is something special in you. As my tribute, I can take you in. Su Tong rested his head on his arm, called out his prop book and took a look at it. He saw the flashing source in the corner emitting a special kind of light. I thought it was probably this thing. Then what's the benefit to me? If I go in, I'm afraid I won't be able to come out again. He pointed to the black mass of infected people below and asked Yan Niang. Just 10 minutes ago, when they climbed up this slope, Su Tong received a notification that Special Plot Mission 1, all the way to the west, was completed. So in theory, the cooperative relationship between himself and Yan Niang has ended at this point. If Yan Niang wants to go in with her, no problem, just provide some practical benefits. After all, he is not someone who sacrifices his life for slogans. Faced with Su Tong's naked request for benefits, Yan Niang couldn't help but frown. If you help me get what I want, I can also help you get what you want. What do I want? Tell me about it. Let's make an agreement first. Forget it. We are all adults. Don't do this nonsense. Your power. No matter how many brain crystals you swallow, these powers do not completely belong to you. Before your death, they can only be regarded as parasitic on you, and I can make these powers truly become a part of you. This is the biggest promise Yan Niang can make at present. After her words fell, a prompt sounded in Su Tong's ear. Special Plot Mission 2, Disaster in the Lair. Mission Goal, seize the mysterious object deep in the lair. Mission Description, deep in the lair in front of you, there is a power beyond human imagination brewing. A king of a new world is destined to be born here, but you will have more than one competitor. Special Plot Mission 2 has been activated. You have the right to choose once, whether to accept the mission or not. Warning, because you have accepted the Special Plot Mission 1, if you refuse the mission at this moment, there will also be a temporary vacuum period in your mission line, and your identity will also be marked as a human traitor. Looking at the mission prompt that came, Su Tong couldn't help but think deeply. He carefully examined every word of the mission description. My mind couldn't help but think of the 4 figures marked as the bad guys. Judging from the direction of the mission, he, the ranger, and the 2 players he met a few days ago should be heading in the same direction. So now in the mission description, remind yourself that there are still competitors, which means that you are likely to meet 4 other players here. At this time, the prototype of the opposition between the 2 camps has taken shape. Thinking of Su Tong unconsciously licking the corners of his lips, he chose to accept it without hesitation. This is not just because of the pie given by Yan Niang. Although her pie is very tempting, if I can help her get to the end, it means that I can permanently gain an ability and powerful increase of my own. No script points are required, there will be no cooldown time, and it will not be restricted by any negative effects. Who can not be tempted by this ability? But if that were all, he might not accept the task. What really made him accept it was the other 4 players. As the saying goes, fighting against heaven and earth is endless fun, fighting against others is endless fun, and fighting against oneself is even more fun. Getting one of the 3 in life is a kind of happiness. What is rare is that the world, people, and self are all alive in front of you. If you don't fight, you will regret it for the rest of your life. What? What if it fails? Don't worry, he has already thought of the most heroic way to die in his mind. Seeing that Su Tong agreed, Yan Niang was secretly relieved. If he didn't agree, she would have to take Su Tong in personally. After all, she needs a qualified tribute to knock on the door of the nest in front of her. But the final result of this would not be what she hoped for. Of course, if they want to enter the lair, they can't just walk in like this, otherwise those brainless infected people will definitely pounce on Su Tong crazily after smelling the scent of a living person on Su Tong's body. Facing the overwhelming army of infected people like a tsunami, even Yan Niang could only retreat. So she needed a ladder to get them inside. The 2 of them were waiting on the slope. From dawn to dusk, some evolvers seemed to smell the living person's breath on Su Tong and quietly groped over. But after sensing the smell emanating from Yan Niang's body, she left in despair. Su Tong was very curious about this and asked Yan Niang the question he had been holding back for a long time: are you an evolved person or a living person? She is said to be a living person because this girl looks almost the same as a living person now. Especially after she swallowed the tumor, the wound on her head has healed, and thick hair has grown in the past few days. He believed that if he took her with him and sneaked into the human camp, no one would be able to discover that this woman was actually an evolver. But this was exactly what he was confused about. You can understand that we are the source species of the virus. There are many types of source species. Unfortunately, you followed the weakest one, so do you regret it? Yan Niang asked half-jokingly. But she soon regretted why she had left this problem to a guy who never took advantage of his words. Regret. He thought about it seriously, then stared at Yan Niang's chest with half-closed eyes, and said with a mean expression on his face: "Then what can you do to compensate me? I am such a bright and good boy, and I have stayed safe for my future lover for so many years as always. You won't let me die with regrets. Sit up quickly and I will move on my own." The corner of Yan Niang's mouth twitched a few times, and her eyes were so cold that she could kill someone. She spat at him coldly, "Bah, can you be any more shameless? If you allow me, I think I can." Yan Niang simply shut her mouth, feeling that if she continued to chat with this guy, she would be unable to resist killing him first. In the middle of the night, the two finally waited for the opportunity to enter the lair. I saw a small team of evolvers coming from the road in the distance. The evolver walking in front was as big as a giant bull. There was a huge lump hanging from his neck, and his huge body caused him to pull up two huge chains and slowly walk forward. Behind the chain was a smashed bus. The roof of the car was torn off, and there were actually more than 10 living people crowded inside. These people huddled up, and when they saw the black mass of infected people in front of them, some of them simply fainted. "Hide inside and they will escort you into the lair. My bone flute is on you. Trust me, I will find you as soon as possible," Yan Niang said, grabbing his collar and rushing towards the team. As if they sensed something approaching, several evolvers escorting the car raised their heads one after another. The leader of the evolvers even let out a low roar. It is a stern warning and anger. In the end, the only thing that responded to him was Yan Niang's ruthless mouth and those slender, sharp nails that were sharper than the edge of a knife. Puff. In an instant, half of this guy's face was torn apart by Yan Niang. The intense pain made him roll on the ground. Before he could get up, Yan Niang's foot stepped on this guy's head. His head was crushed to pieces instantly. She raised her head, and her delicate face was actually cracked open, revealing the dense eyeballs on her forehead, glaring at the other evolvers, and making a strange whisper in her mouth. As if scolding them, Su Tong stared at the face in front of him with wide eyes, couldn't help but cover his forehead, and complained in a low voice, don't move, sure enough, love will disappear." Yan Niang he glared at him fiercely and threw him into the bus behind him. Bang! I don't know how many people it hit, but the bottom part of my body was quite soft. Sorry, I just wanted a ride." He got up and took a look, only to see a pair of desperate eyes looking at him in the carriage. It seemed that the relief on Su Tong's face was in sharp contrast to their despair. Being stared at by so many people, Su Tong had to shake his shoulders. "Ahem, don't be like this. Believe me and be optimistic. My teacher often said that no one can leave this world alive. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment." Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 108. Although Su Tong said he was very optimistic, no one in the car could be optimistic. Some people put their hands together and recite Amitabha silently, but even in hell, Amitabha has no effect. There is a couple hugging each other tightly, maybe today will be their last hug. There were also people holding their heads and crying, or even cursing in a low voice. If you listened carefully, it was not difficult to hear that it turned out that he was betrayed by his brothers and was caught by these evolvers. But whether it is regret or fear. As the car entered the huge city in front of us, no one dared to make a sound. Bang, bang, bang. The violent flapping sound sounded like thunder in my ears. The smell of living people, suddenly like water droplets falling into boiling oil, was enough to drive these infected people crazy. The bus, which weighed at least 7 tons, felt like it was about to be overturned. Ah! An arm covered with rotten flesh suddenly stretched out from the car window, grabbed a woman's hair, and tried to pull it out. Fortunately, everyone grabbed the girl one after another, but she only got a handful of hair broken. Boom! A huge fleshy palm stepped on the roof of the car, and an evolutionist shook his 6 lizard-like hands and knocked away the infected people who had climbed onto the car. But his huge body almost caused the car to overturn. Fortunately, The other evolvers guarding the car quickly began to clear the area, constantly grabbing the infected people who dared to challenge their authority, opening their mouths to bite off their heads, and casually smashing the corpses onto other infected people. A big piece. And these infected people who are knocked down will be trampled into pulp in an instant. Crazy, this place is simply hell. No, even hell is not as scary as here. As the car drove slowly deeper, Su Tong raised his head and saw not only high-rise buildings, but also huge sarcomas attached to the high-rise buildings, forming a huge flesh-colored dome. If you look carefully at these flesh-colored domes, you will find that they are actually covered with many reptile-like evolvers. Their slender bodies look like geckos, but they have a face that looks like a human. There is also a huge fleshy pouch on the tail. The meat bags seemed to be filled with infected people and bones. They would swallow a stream of sticky flesh-colored liquid from their mouths, then grab a handful of human bones from the flesh bag and stick them on top to build the dome. If there are not enough corpses, just grab some infected people instead, knead them casually, or chew off the heads and stick them on as materials. So much so that if you look around, you will see arms stretched out in the air in many places, swinging feebly. Are these guys transforming the city? He was a little surprised, thinking that these infected people who were driven here were just building materials, right? The number of infected people outside is increasing. Everyone in the car is crawling on the ground as much as possible. The car is shaking. Once thrown out, the consequences can be imagined. Suddenly there was a scream. The sound did not come from the car, but from behind them. Someone boldly raised his head and looked back, and instantly saw a scene that he would never forget. Not far behind them, another large truck was seen coming from outside. Before the evolutionaries guarding the truck could protect the truck, it was directly pushed down by the infected who were already extremely agitated. In an instant, the humans in the carriage fell out and fell among countless infected people. With their screams, they were torn to pieces in the blink of an eye. Even if those angry evolvers rushed down immediately and smashed some infected people into pulp, it would be of no avail. They could only let out angry roars and massacre among these infected people before giving up hastily. Seeing this, everyone was filled with fear and joy. Fortunately, they were the first wave to come in. Compared with the second car behind them, when they came in, most of the infected people had not yet reacted. Plus the few evolutionaries in their car were relatively fierce and powerful. Protect the car in time, kill all the infected people rushing in front, and stabilize it as soon as possible, otherwise they would be just a pile of bones by now. Thinking of the few people in this car, they actually felt a little bit grateful to the evolutionaries who escorted them. I have to say that humans are really complex animals. Unlike everyone else, Su Tong was a little disappointed when he looked at the car behind him. Obviously, there was no player on it that he was expecting. The car passed through the huge square and saw that it was full of ruins. Huh. A middle-aged man quietly raised his head and took a look outside the car. He couldn't help but be a little surprised. I was here last year. There was a Ginza shopping mall here at the time. Why is it gone? After he finished speaking, his eyes were all complicated. In a flash, it was just last year. At that time, his position had just been promoted to project director, and his monthly income could reach more than 100,000 yuan. For this reason, I brought my wife and children here specially. I remember that they bought a lot of things that day. The children were very happy, and I also felt that the days were getting more and more comfortable. Who would have thought that in just 1 year, when we come here again, the world will have come to an end? Such a contrast made him want to slap himself twice, telling himself that he was dreaming and that as long as he opened his eyes, he would wake up from his bed immediately. But the reality is bloody. No matter whether he pinches himself or hits himself, or how many times he opens his eyes, he can't change the facts before him. Everyone looked quietly, and sure enough, there was nothing. That Ginza shopping mall is a famous shopping mall. It is known as a city that never sleeps and is open 24 hours a day. Just before the virus outbreak, it was still promoting some discounts and promotions. Now there is no shadow at all. When the car approached, they discovered that the mall had been bulldozed, leaving only a huge cave on the ground. Before they even got into the car, the strong and pungent smell in the air almost made them faint. Looking again, the walls of the cave are all made of bones and flesh. No wonder the smell is so disgusting. But aside from the bad smell, there's some grudging good news. It seems that after arriving here, the infected people were isolated from the cave. Even though they surrounded the cave and made shrill screams, they did not dare to take a step into the thunder pool. This also made them secretly relieved. The car went deeper and deeper, and the shadow of the underground parking lot could still be vaguely seen. However, as the car continued to go down, no trace of human construction could be seen at all. All kinds of evolvers began to come out of the huge underground cave. The bodies of these evolved beings were grotesque, and some actually let out shrill laughter like humans. They ran over and stood on the roof of the car. Her eyeballs explored like poisonous snakes and scanned the faces of everyone in the car. This scene undoubtedly caused the people inside the car to scream in fear. But fortunately, these evolvers didn't look like they were going to eat them right away. After all, there were only a dozen or so people in this car. If they really wanted to eat them, the guards would probably eat them halfway through the journey, leaving no bones left. The car was pulled into a huge cave. Several mutants pushed the car forward and allowed the car to slide forward on its own. Alive. Although they don't know what will happen next, at this moment, their faces are filled with joy of surviving the disaster. Someone carefully poked their head out, only to realize that outside the car window, there were human beings who looked exactly like them. The strange thing is that these people are actually naked. No matter whether they are men or women, they don't even have a fig leaf. Just when they were surprised by this, a group of people slowly approached the car outside the car. There was an obvious difference between these people and the others, that is, they were wearing clothes. And not just one or two pieces of clothing, but 2 or 3 layers of coats, and some even dressed themselves up in weird ways. He stared blankly at the car that was slowly stopping in front of him, and quickly began to rush towards it. After Su Tong glanced at these people, he raised his brows slightly, stood up from his seat, and looked at the strangers behind him. In line with the mentality of being in the same boat for 100 years, he whispered to them, "Guys, welcome to the scene of a large-scale robbery. Be prepared to be stripped naked." Before anyone could understand what he meant, Su Tong had already jumped onto the roof of the car. If these people were smart enough, they might have followed his lead at this moment, but until Su Tong jumped out of the car far away, no one could follow him. So it's a pity, but after a while, men's curses and women's screams came from the car. Some women were stripped naked and thrown out of car windows by 3 or 5 men. The man was beaten to a pulp, and in the end he couldn't escape the fate of being stripped naked. When someone saw Su Tong, their eyes flashed with ferocity, and they rushed forward with a wrench in their hands. "Take off your clothes." As a result, before the wrench was smashed, Su Tong suddenly turned around and slapped him so hard that his nose bleeded. He almost spun around in a circle and froze in place, obviously being blinded. Head. Only then did Su Tong take out a cigarette from his pocket and throw it to him. "Take me to see your boss here." Maybe it was because he was beaten by Su Tong and he no longer had the same vigor as before, or maybe it was because the cigarette in his hand was too tempting. After being stunned for a few seconds, the man immediately nodded like a chicken eating rice and led Su Tong inside. No one knows how big this huge cave is. The passages extending in all directions were crowded with humans, but most of them had no clothes. And when they saw those similar people wearing clothes, their first reaction was actually fear, as if these people wearing clothes were more like those infected people who eat people without spitting out bones. When they passed through a cave, they saw a huge iron pot bubbling black water. Several women on the side carefully stirred the black water with iron rods, and actually pulled out a boiled leather belt. Looking at the leather belt, the woman swallowed a mouthful of spit. It seemed like it wasn't a leather belt, but more like a strip of overcooked beef. Sure enough, no matter what stage a person reaches, he can never forget the words "the weak and the strong." Infinite script killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 109. Ding ding ding. In the cave, a faint fire illuminated the darkness. Surprisingly, the leader of this group of robbers was actually an old man. When Su Tong saw him, he was carrying himself on his back, holding a chisel in one hand and a small hammer in the other, carefully carving on a cement slab in front of him. He took a closer look and saw that it was actually the Tao Te Ching. As if he sensed someone coming, the old man glanced sideways and said nothing. He just pointed to the sofa chair removed from the car and motioned for him to sit down first. Then, while tapping the chisel in his hand, he said to himself, "I don't know who you are, and I don't know what you want to do. If you are here to ask for directions, I can only tell you to give up on this idea. I can't get out of here." Su Tong took out a cigar from his arms and slowly heated it up with the flame of the simple oil lamp beside him. Regarding the old man's inquiry, he was more concerned about another thing. "You just said, them. Who are you referring to?" The old man's hand paused for a moment, then turned around, only to see that the other side of his face was covered with bruises, and one of his eyeballs had been smashed out. He looked at Su Tong carefully with his remaining left eye. "A week ago, 2 people killed more than a dozen of us after getting out of the car." The old man pointed to his blinded eye, which was obviously their work. "It seems that a player has indeed entered the lair. And it was much earlier than I expected. This place is very big. Go to the back and can accommodate thousands of people. There are no infected people or evolved people there. If you are hungry, we can provide you with some food, such as boiled leather shoes or belts, but don't keep killing people." What the old man said was really surprising. You must know that they had just stripped off all the clothes of a car of people and beat the men severely. And such a group of bandit leaders would actually beg themselves not to kill innocent people indiscriminately. The standard saint mode really surprised him. As if aware of the suspicion in Su Tong's eyebrows, the old man continued, "When we were first captured, there were 2,000 people here. Within 3 days, nearly half of them were dead. They were not killed by those monsters. But he was beaten to death by others. Etiquette, justice, and integrity have no meaning here. Survival is the first need. At this time, the more we need order." Su Tong smoked a cigarette and stretched out his palm to interrupt the old man's intention to continue speaking. In fact, he was not interested in listening to this old man's deception. When it comes to deception, the most indispensable thing in mental hospitals is this kind of magician. The most serious villain was even locked up in a small room in the critical ward, and no one was allowed to talk to him, because he had deceived 3 psychiatrists into going crazy. "I just ask one question, where are they?" The people Su Tong was referring to were naturally the 2 players. "Not here." The old man shook his head and said that he was unclear about the traces of the 2 guys. They seemed to disappear not long after entering. Some people said they were eaten by monsters outside, others said they found a way to escape, but no one cared about either way. Seeing that nothing could be found, Su Tong stood up and left. Etc. The old man suddenly called Su Tong and stared at the cigar in his hand. "If you give me the cigar in your hand, I can tell you a secret." "Secret?" He glanced at the old man, then at the cigar in his hand, took out a pack of cigarettes from the props book and threw it to him. "Forget the cigars, just save some." The old man picked up the cigarette, quickly tore open the wrapping paper, pinched a snow-white cigarette from the inside with trembling fingers, lit it, put it to his mouth, and took a long puff. Hisped. Cough 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 cough. The pungent smoke came out of his mouth, and finally a gleam of light flashed through the old man's cloudy single eye, which seemed to sweep away the decadence all over his body. He whispered to Su Tong, "I discovered that they need humans, living humans, because they have no ability to reproduce." The old man seemed to be afraid that Su Tong would be disappointed and did not dare to tell the truth, so he immediately continued, "There was a theory a long time ago. If humans live longer and have higher requirements for quality of life, then the desire to reproduce will be lower, and vice versa. These monsters are corpses after all. No matter what abilities they can evolve, there is one thing they can never evolve, and that is reproduction. Their cells will not have viable eggs and sperm at all. So they can't survive for a long time. Those infected are examples. They are rotting and smelly. How long can they last? Time will turn them into bones." The old man's words are interesting, but what does it have to do with the fact that they need a living person? Without waiting for him to ask, the old man had already lit his second cigarette and said, "When we came in, were they building a house?" He nodded. "That's right, they are building a uterus. These beasts actually want to create a uterus. Ha 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 ha, go crazy. You would never think that such a great biological invention was created from a pile of corpses." At this point, the old man was laughing so hard that he almost shed tears. It's so ridiculous that these dead people actually want to challenge God's realm. Then he pointed at himself, "If they succeed in building it, what are we? We are the sperm, the source they use to create new life. Do you think we are in disguise, humming their mother? Ha 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 ha, hum their mother." By the end of the story, the old man started to go a little crazy. I don't know how much time passed before the old man gradually calmed down. When he looked back, he saw that Su Tong's people had already left, leaving only half a cigar for him on the table. When he came out of the cave, he found that the bus he had come from had been completely dismantled. Not even a wheel was left. The resources here are so scarce that even a needle and a thread are enough to become the target of people's struggle. What this old magician said is a bit crazy, but it is undeniable that there seems to be something else. It seems that this old magician is not without any ability. Su Tong randomly found a relatively clean place and took out the fat man from the backpack behind him. Looking at Fatty carefully, he found that there seemed to be a little cold light in Fatty's pupils, but when he tried to throw Fatty into the prop book, he was still rejected. This item is in a special period and cannot be included in the prop book. After hearing the prompt, Su Tong simply took advantage of this time to remove the temporary patches on the fat man's body and start repairing it again. He still had 900 script points on hand to repair a few holes, which was no problem. Occasionally, some naked men and women would look towards him, and there were even a few good-looking women who came up to him, wanting to beg for some resources from Su Tong to exchange for some food. But when they got closer, a big knife suddenly struck down, almost disemboweling the woman walking in front. Now no one dared to approach him. In fact, there are some places in the back where there are no people at all and it is very clean, but Su Tong has not considered that place because there is always a pungent smell of barbecue. He spent more than 50 script points on sewing and mending, and finally let him repair the holes in the fat man's body. It's a pity that the spirit enchantment technique has not been able to successfully enchant the spirit with gold foil until now. Otherwise, I would give you a layer no matter what. Seeing the repaired little fat man, Su Tong breathed a sigh of relief. He tried to control Fatty, wanting to verify whether Fatty could be controlled now, but just when he activated the paper control technique, a warm current suddenly surged down his fingertips. In an instant, it was as if a hand was holding his palm. It was a blissful feeling, as if the fat man in front of me had come to life. You are trying to accelerate the change of this item. Your approach will consume a lot of script points. This is not recommended. Please terminate it immediately. A cold prompt came, but he seemed not to hear it. He glanced at his prop book and saw that the script points in the prop book were being deducted at the rate of 2 script points per minute. Seeing this, Su Tong put his hand on the fat man's head unscrupulously. Time passed minute by minute, and a full 2 hours had passed. When he saw that the script points that had been consumed had reached 240 points, the corners of Su Tong's mouth began to jump. Calculating my investment in this fat man, it was enough to buy 2 good prop cards. But the more this happened, the more curious he became. Because, he found that whether it was the ability of the item card or the temporary power given by the world, they all followed the principle of equivalent exchange. Since it is an exchange of equal value, the investment you make in the fat man will definitely be rewarded accordingly. He wanted to see if this fat man could give him a reasonable surprise if he divided up so many scripts. Warning: your behavior has seriously interfered with the evolution process of this item. Please stop this action, otherwise the item has a 50% chance of shattering. At this time, a stern warning suddenly came from my ears. But he didn't care. Life was like a big gamble. He had already invested so much, so there was no reason to give up when the cards were drawn. At this moment, a cold black mist suddenly rose from the fat man's body, causing the surrounding temperature to drop by more than 10 degrees. Originally, some people were curious and wanted to gather around to see what this guy was doing, but before they even got close, they were shivering from the cold. The chill became stronger and stronger, and soon his eyebrows were covered with a thin layer of frost. What's even weirder is that there seems to be a black fire burning on the fat man's body, and from time to time he can hear sneers from around him. At this time, Su Tong was surprised to find that the script points consumption had suddenly tripled. Warning: your behavior is interfering and seriously changing the evolution process of this item. Please stop immediately, otherwise this item has a 70% chance of shattering. With the good guy's warning this time, the probability of failure suddenly increased to 70%. Others might have hesitated, but Su Tong's face was filled with anticipation. He had a strong intuition that he would succeed. This was by no means a delusion, but just now, the feeling of bliss in his soul was as strong as touching a nerve in him. Screenplay scores dropped rapidly. I'm afraid if other players saw this, they would think this guy was crazy. This is completely burning your life. The paper man in front of you is like a bottomless pit, devouring precious script points. And knowing that the final result of smashing it will probably be failure, you are still smashing it into it. This is either a gamble, a red-eyed gambler, or a complete lunatic. Warning: your behavior is interfering and seriously changing the evolution process of this item. Please stop immediately, otherwise this item has a 90% chance of shattering. The probability of failure increased again, but Su Tong's eyes were extremely clear. Even if there was only a 1% chance, he still wanted to try to put this bet to the end. Maybe it was because I was too focused, or because there were too many messy things in the prop book. Su Tong didn't notice at all that at this moment, in the crystal box shining with fantasy light in his prop book, wisps of green fluorescence that were completely different from usual were flashing. Under the flickering light, an indescribable aura surrounded him. The warning sounded again, but this time it was completely ignored by Su Tong. Even if he was told that the probability of failure was 100%, he would never give up at this time. Seeing the black cold light on the fat man getting stronger and stronger, the anticipation shining in Su Tong's eyes became more intense. The script score dropped rapidly from the original number of 800 to 500 in the blink of an eye. A drop of cold sweat rolled down his forehead. The only thing he was worried about now was that his script score might not be enough. Everyone around was watching from a distance. No one knew what was happening. Su Tong was surrounded by a layer of frost. Some people wanted to get closer, but they couldn't stand even 10 meters away. The snow-white frost was like an egg wrapping him inside. Shashasha. At this time, Outside the cave, there was a sudden rustling sound, the sound was unusually rapid, and a group of evolvers rushed in from the outside. You must know that these evolved people never break in, but today they broke the precedent. Their speed was very fast, and the first time they rushed in, they targeted the frost where Sutong was. They let out excited screams, and a mantis-like evolver rushed up quickly, waving its huge flesh wings and fanning towards the white frost in front of them. Call. Suddenly, cold fog flew in, causing the surrounding air to drop again. Everyone's minds tightened and they couldn't help but sweat for Sutong. However, when the frost disappeared, something strange happened. There was nothing in front of him, and Sutong's figure seemed to disappear out of thin air. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 110. Sorry, because I was pressed for time, I accidentally copied the previous chapter too. I realized I was confused after uploading it. But I can't modify it at this time, because it can't be modified if it exceeds 1,000 words. So I temporarily put the new chapter in the front and the old chapter in the back. Then I stayed up all night writing and finally wrote a chapter. I overlaid it on the repeated chapter. You only need to update this chapter. I saw the new content. I'm really sorry, I was so confused. Rumble, rumble. The entire nest was shaking, as if something came to life under their feet. A large number of infected people were lying on the ground in fear, and even the evolved people showed panic expressions. Fortunately, this violent tremor went away as quickly as it came. It's just that more and more evolved people rushed into the human breeding circle. They were not massacring, but they were catching every human being, sniffing them carefully several times, and even licking them a few times to make sure. If there is no problem, just throw it aside. They were looking for traces of Sutong, but Sutong was not here. At the corner of a cave, I saw a fat man with a thick body, jumping forward. Every time he took a step, his figure would flicker, and the next step would often appear more than 10 meters away. Some evolutionists always look suspicious when they see a big fat man jumping around, but it's just suspicious. Tons. In Fatty's belly, Sutong's eyes surveyed the huge lair world around him. The fat man's belly looks thick from the outside, but in fact it is completely transparent and has a very thin layer, as if it could be easily pierced by a needle. This is Fatty's first form, the ghost form. In addition to the ghost form, Fatty has two other forms. The skills corresponding to each form are different. It is not an exaggeration to describe my big gamble this time as a direct hit of the jackpot with a probability of 100 to 1. He looked at his prop book. He remembered clearly that he originally had 845 script points, which was a huge sum of money, but now, he only had a pitiful 280 points left. Nearly 600 points of the script evaporated and disappeared, but he didn't feel bad at all, because the fat man disappeared and was replaced by a prop card. Magic Paper Fat Man, Producer Sutong. Blessed by weird Eastern metaphysics, and infused with special soul power by an unknown power, the weirdest thing is that this object that should not exist was actually successfully forcibly fused with the blessing of some mysterious lucky force. Holding the prop card can summon Paper Fatty at any time. Additional Skill 1, Ghost Form. It consumes 2 script points and enters the ghost form after activation. In the ghost form, it has the passive skill Spirit Flash Swallowing Belly. Cooling time, 8 hours. Passive skill, Swallowing the Belly. A living person or object can be swallowed and carried in the abdomen. The load capacity shall not exceed 300 kilograms. Passive skill, Flash. Can flash 10-30 meters forward. Note, the fat man who enters the ghost state cannot cause damage to any creature or object. He is immune to pure physical damage, but the spell damage increases by 200%. Additional skill 2, Paper Armor Form. It consumes 2 script points. After activation, it enters the paper armor form. In the paper armor state, it has the passive skills Thousand Claws Swallowing Belly. Cooling time, 8 hours. Passive skill, Thousand Claws. The palm will split into a huge number of tentacle forms. Additional skill 3, Rampage form. After the other two forms suffered fatal blows, Jian automatically activated and entered the Rampage state. In the Rampage state, he has skills, Destruction Bomb Compression Cannon. Cooling time, 24 hours. Active skill 1, Compression Cannon. When it enters a violent state, it will spit out all objects in its belly towards the target in front, with a maximum range of 200 meters. Passive skill, Destruction Bomb. In the rampaging state, when the body is severely injured, it will quickly choose to self-destruct, causing a high-intensity explosion to all creatures within a diameter of 70 square meters. After self-destruction, you need to pay an additional 300 script points and resummon within 24 hours. If it exceeds 24 hours, the summoning chips will be doubled, and so on. The above are all the skill entries of Big Fatty. But that's not all, because from the time he turned into a prop card with an entry, he had become a summoned object with a certain mind, and was no longer an object controlled by himself. There is an essential difference here. This not only means that I will have an extra super follower, but it also means that I can make 2 more paper figures as helpers. He was simply lucky this time, but was it really luck? Su Tong couldn't help but look at the dazzling crystal box in the props book. Just after he got out of trouble, he looked through the props book and found a very strange message in the props book. Warning, your behavior is interfering and seriously changing the evolution process of this item, %Yuan, the power of the source is involved. This was the last warning from space. At that time, my failure rate had reached an astonishing 90%. With this addition, I am afraid that the failure probability would be at least 99%. But here's the weird thing. There was only half of this message, and the rest was all garbled. The last sentence of the intervention of the power of source made him cast suspicious eyes on this mysterious prop card. She seemed to understand why the host wanted to sell this prop card to her again and again. What? Are there transaction restrictions? He doesn't need to worry about this at all. Since the host knows that she has such a prop card, she must know the restrictions, but she still wants to buy it, which shows that even if there are rules restrictions, there must be ways to circumvent them. In any case, Fatty's strength was exactly what he wanted to see. Even in the ghost state, most of the evolved people couldn't tell whether the fat man was their kind. After all, there are not a few evolvers of human appearance here. As long as the fat man isolates the smell from his body, it means that he can travel unimpeded in this hellish place at this moment. The tunnels and corridors are built up high with bones. If you look at it from the perspective of human identity, it can be called a work of art. There are many twists and turns in the tunnel, but it is not completely dark. If you look carefully, there are rows of holes in the tunnel. They are not just ventilation openings. I think they function as light wells. It has to be said that those lizard-like evolvers seem to be born experts in architecture. With a mouthful of spit and a handful of bones, such a large project was built under the ground. Su Tong's goal was naturally to go straight to explore the deepest part of the cave. He was also curious about what kind of secrets were hidden in the deepest part of the cave. Is it true, as the old man said, that these viruses that are destroying the world are really going to create new humans? There may be some truth to what the old man said. But it's not enough to just base everything on his conjecture. He needs to witness it with his own eyes. Walking through the bright corridor, Su Tong was suddenly stunned. The huge wall of flesh in front of him was exactly the same as what he saw in the post office building. These fleshy walls squirm slightly and look like human intestinal organs. A semi-humanoid evolver came from one end. His upper body was that of a human, wearing a snow-white shirt and a black tuxedo. She has long snow-white hair and actually has gold-rimmed eyes. With one hand on his chest, he looks like a butler in European and American TV series. But the premise is to ignore his reptile-like lower body. When he saw it, he was stunned for a moment. He looked at the fat man with suspicious eyes, his face became colder and colder, and his slender body circled around him. Da-da-da-da-da. The slender claws are on the ground, making a rhythmic sound. Even though he has many feet, it does not make people feel bored. Like a walking gramophone, it will play a disco or jazz rhythm for you at any time. In his fat belly, he was ready to attack. He could pull out the big knife from the prop book at any time and use it with his lightning power to kill the opponent. Why are they so stupid, these idiots? Surprisingly, the evolver who looked like a butler in front of him seemed to have misunderstood something. He turned around and said, "Follow me." Then he walked along the path to the other side. Su Tong was stunned, and immediately motioned to the fat man to follow him and watch quietly. Remember, don't use your stupidity to test the patience of these leaders. The Queen Mother will definitely choose our master from among them, so we must be careful. The last idiot actually tried to challenge the authority of these leaders. What a fool! Idiot! The butler seemed to be reminding him, or talking to himself. He took Su Tong all the way up, and at a corner, he actually saw an elevator. This couldn't help but surprise him, and he also noticed that among these evolutionaries, many of them had begun to have complete thinking like human beings. Ding! As the elevator door opened, a ray of warm sunlight shone down on him. Su Tong's eyes widened and he suddenly realized that the fat man's ghost form actually began to fade in the sunlight. When he saw that his body was about to be exposed, Big Fatty finally discovered the problem and hurriedly turned sideways and dodged into the shadows ahead. The housekeeper turned around suspiciously, and when he saw the big, honest face with black eyes and a naive smile, the corners of his mouth twitched a few times. It is found that the governance of these new evolvers is getting lower and lower. It should be that the nutrition intake is not enough. The housekeeper secretly sighed in his heart. After all, as time goes by, the supplies that can be captured are getting less and less. If the evolver fails to replenish enough living people and absorb enough nutrients within a short period of time after evolution, his intelligence will be sluggish. It is trouble that cannot be escaped. However, seeing that he can still understand his own language shows that his intelligence is not too imbecile. Taking a step forward with him, Su Tong discovered that at this moment they had actually left the underground cave and arrived at the largest sky garden in WL City. Not far forward, a surprising scene appeared in his sight. He saw those evolved people wearing neat robes, who looked like attendants. Not only did they put on human clothes, but they also played human music. Song. And the object of their clothing is actually a human being. Chapter 32, The Taste of Freedom. No, it should be said to be a pathogen, the same as Yan Niang. If the infected person is the lowest level, then the evolved person is one level higher. And above the evolvers are these pathogens. They seem to be born and destined to be superior to many infected people. The inspired pathogens rush to this nest from all directions, of course not for the party. They are not living people and have no habit of celebrating the new year. There is only one reason. The Queen Mother, the source of all viruses, has reached the end of her life. The new generation of kings will be selected from these pathogens. They looked completely like humans at the moment, wearing neat and expensive suits and carrying valuable watches on their wrists. They were walking among these monsters and enjoying the food and drinks handed over by these evolvers. There was even a young man sitting in front of the piano and playing a jazz tune to everyone in a melodious manner. But no matter how much the devil pretends to be, he will still show his foxtail after all. Sure enough, halfway through the banquet, these guys who were just polite and gentlemanly in their movements were already eager to show their fangs. Ding! With a light knocking sound, a man with a mustache stood up and looked at the brothers and sisters in front of him with fiery eyes. With this cup, we honor our mother, the Queen. To the Queen, everyone raised the wine glass in their hands and drank it all in one gulp. When the wine glass was picked up again, it had been replaced with fresh blood. I would like to congratulate the brothers and sisters sitting here with this cup. The tributes you have found will definitely be favored by the Queen Mother. Unfortunately, I was not able to find anything that the Queen Mother likes. I only found this. Mustache clapped his hands, and a box was brought up by his attendant. When the box was opened, it turned out to be a heart containing a vigorous life. The heart was stored in a glass box. Every time it beats, everyone could even hear the sound in their ears. It was like the sound of drums. Was the powerful breath of life rushing towards his face? Su Tong couldn't help but feel excited when he looked at such a huge heart. This powerful heart is enough to extend the life of the Queen Mother for a few more months. I believe the Queen Mother will definitely feel my heart. The mustache pinched the beard at the corner of his mouth and squinted at the rest of the people at the table. Sure enough, this heart containing the power of life immediately made many people jealous. Everyone knows that the Queen Mother's decline is simply too fast. It is very likely that within the next few days, she will have to choose a successor, and she will not even be able to see the day when the nest is completely completed. But with this new heart, the Queen Mother's life can be extended by at least 3 to 4 months. At that time, the Queen Mother will have the opportunity to witness the completion of the nest she created. This is indeed a rare gift for the Queen Mother. However, the things are good things, but there are still some people who will find fault with them. Can the Queen Mother bear such a big heart in her body? Let's look at mine. Someone took out another thing, which was a bottle, which also contained rich life essence. It was made from more than a dozen top-quality brain crystals with strong vitality. Just one drop can make a disabled ordinary person regenerate from his broken arm. It is feasible to know the importance of this thing to the Queen Mother. And mine. Mine. Su Tong stood behind, watching these filial sons rushing to show off their tributes. He hid behind and was so greedy that he almost drooled. I began to wonder how I could steal some treasures from these guys. The quarrel among the filial sons became more and more fierce, and they even tore their faces apart, revealing their original ferocious faces. Ding ding. Suddenly, a clear and sweet knocking sound came from behind them all unexpectedly. Hee hee hee. Suddenly the garden became quiet. Everyone looked up and saw shiny black leather shoes stepping on the floor on the steps of the garden. Number 8, who was walking down from the upper floor step by step, looked sideways at the people at the dining table and let out a contemptuous sound. Sneer. He tapped the wine glass in his hand with one hand and said, "You are really filial children. I think the Queen Mother will definitely give you a slap in the face when she sees your gifts." Number 8. When they saw the man in red, the mustaches immediately became quiet. The man he called Number 8 walked up to the table, glanced in the direction of Su Tong, and waved the wine glass in his hand. Fortunately, Su Tong reacted quickly and immediately reminded the fat man in a low voice to pour the wine. "You'd better stop arguing. If the Mother Queen wants to extend her life, wouldn't it be nice to just grab a few of the evolutionaries in the lair and devour them? Why are you wasting your time here?" Hearing this, the faces of the seed players in front of them suddenly became strange. Although they were very unconvinced, what Number 8 said was not something they couldn't understand. Your stupid wisdom obviously hasn't understood that the Queen Mother has inspired us. It's because she understands that the historical significance of her life has ended. She needs a new king to inherit her wishes as soon as possible. You will only lead the ethnic group to destroy. After Number 8 finished speaking, seeing that the brothers seemed unconvinced, he put down the delicate silver wine glass in his hand and clapped his hands. Jingle bell. As the silver bell rang, a woman appeared behind Number 8. The woman had a sweet appearance, but this sweetness had to ignore the split mouth on her neck and the extra pair of arms on her shoulders. But the point was not the woman's appearance. When number 8 stood up and put his hand on the woman's abdomen, everyone's eyes changed instantly. I saw the shadow of a hand in the woman's bulging belly from time to time, stretching the woman's belly. This is impossible. The mustache screamed, even if they are pathogens, they do not have any reproductive ability, so it is impossible to get pregnant. The Queen Mother built such a huge nest, and her truly great plan was to create the power to truly have children. But now the appearance of this woman is undoubtedly like thunder. Once her heir is born, it means that the Queen Mother's plan can move forward for at least 3 years. How important this is to the Queen Mother. At this moment, whatever treasures or essences are, they are all garbage. There is nothing impossible. She was pregnant before she was infected, and she became infected in time after her death. The most amazing thing is that the baby in her belly is still alive. Number 8 opened his arms and took a deep breath into the wine glass with an intoxicated expression. This is all an arrangement of fate. As he said that, he held the woman's waist and turned to leave with a proud look on his face. After number 8 left, Xiaozu and others immediately lost interest in arguing anymore and packed up their things to leave. Su Tong originally wanted to find an opportunity to follow one up and try to see if there was a chance to kill one. However, the housekeeper asked him to stay with several other evolved people to clean up the messy dining table. So much so that he lost the opportunity to follow up and start robbing. But while clearing the table, he accidentally learned something. That is, there is actually a private helicopter on the top of this building. Naturally, this matter was casually mentioned by 2 evolvers when they were chatting about this hanging garden. But Su Tong's mind suddenly became active. Helicopter was the fastest way to safely leave this ghost place. Thinking of this, Su Tong directed the bear to the fire escape while the other evolvers were not paying attention. His figure flashed and he quickly climbed up the stairs and waited. It was a very small iron door, and the door lock on it was completely corroded. He didn't need to use any force, and the big bear could pull it open with just a handful of it. When I opened the small door, I felt a breeze blowing on my face. I looked up and said, "Oh. It's great to have money." The rooftop is not a barren airport as imagined. 2 coconut trees stand tall on the side. Looking up, the sky is blue and the clouds are white. Standing on the edge, it feels like you want to step on the whole world under your feet. The huge frameless swimming pool blends the reflection of the sky with the water surface, forming a pair of stunning views of sky and water. This is no longer a question of money, being able to live without money. It is conceivable that the people who lived in this building in the past were afraid that they would be either rich or noble. At this moment, several muffled gasps were suddenly heard not far away. Su Tong was stunned for a moment, only to hear a slight moan from a woman not far away, but the scream was quite tantalizing. It was like a vague thread wandering in the heart, tugging at it. It's so tempting. This made him subconsciously think of the scene when the host teased him in his ear when he returned last time. He put the big fat away, quietly stepped on the edge of the roof, and quietly poked his head out to take a look. Hiss. The hot scenes are enough to put the author into a dark room 100 times. That dazzling body was only against the huge floor-to-ceiling window, and a man was rushing up from behind. The scene was indescribable, so he squinted to take a look. He was stunned for a moment, took his head back, rubbed his eyes and wondered if he had seen something wrong. After another look, sure enough, this woman was the pregnant woman who was held in her arms on the 8th just now. And that man didn't look like an evolved person. After carefully examining it for a moment, he was basically sure that this man was most likely a player. After regaining his composure, the man looked a little panicked and he hurriedly put on his clothes. The woman with the round belly shook out 2 small pills from the necklace on her chest. She didn't know what they were, but seeing the look on his face as he left happily, she thought they must be good things. After sending the man away, she walked out of the room naked and stood by the swimming pool, rinsing her body with water and brushing her long hair. The forearms make her shoulders look full of explosive power, but the perfect curves are as perfect as a miraculous workmanship. After washing my body a little, the woman spread her arms and swam to the edge of the pool. Looking at the beautiful scenery in the distance, she not only closed her eyes, opened her forearms, and felt the breeze blowing on her face. A little bit of a cool feeling. Is this what freedom feels like? She took a deep breath, never feeling that she was closer to freedom than ever before, and couldn't help but scream to herself. No. That's the smell of rainbow. A crisp and powerful answer startled her. She quickly opened her eyes and saw a rainbow, appearing and disappearing under the refraction of the sun. A man's figure was standing upstream, taking off his pants with both hands, and grinned at the woman. "Sorry, I've been a little angry lately." The woman was startled and suddenly realized what the slightly fishy raindrops that had just been sprinkled on her face were. Sorry, I'm confused by the code. This chapter actually copied the previous chapter. But because of the starting point setting, once the VIP chapter is released, if more than 1,000 words are deleted, the editor needs to be reported, but this point now, the editor has gone to bed. I can only say that I will do another update tonight and cover the content of the previous chapter. Sorry for causing trouble to everyone. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shuigan Xiao. Chapter 113. The woman was stunned for a while before she realized that her face had actually been sprinkled with urine, and her pretty face was about to be torn apart on the spot. I kill you. No one has ever dared to do this to her, not even number 8. It's a pity that Su Tong is not number 8, nor does he have any sympathy for an evolved person. Amid the angry roar of the woman, he slowly opened his palms. Zit-size. In an instant, the arc of electricity flashed by the waterside, causing the woman's scream to rise to another level in an instant. He wasn't worried about whether the woman's screams would attract other evolutions. After all, in such a beautiful place, a romantic and intense date, no matter what her purpose was, I believe she would not want more people to know the secret. So he expected that the number of people who knew she was here would definitely not exceed single digits. You bastard, I will tear off your flesh inch by inch and dry it in the sun. As soon as the woman's angry curses ended, Su Tong jumped down from the roof, grabbed a handful of the woman's hair, immersed her head in the pool, and at the same time increased the release of the electric light. Violent electric current penetrated the woman's body, so that her hair and feet were stretched straight one by one. Crash! When her head was pulled out of the water again, the woman's face had become very pale, and the gray veins under her skin could even be seen. Her sexy body was shaking in the pool, and her eyes were staring at the man in front of her in panic. There was no joy, anger, or joy in the man's indifferent eyes, and he was as cold as a machine. This made her feel a strong sense of fear for the first time. I saw him roughly pulling off the necklace from her neck and opening the small pendant on the necklace. Inside was a small glass tube containing several small black pills. After Su Tong threw them into the prop book, information about these pills suddenly appeared in front of him. Biomixed products, semi-finished products. Due to some special reason, Tana's body will reject a lot of excess energy. This energy has a strong amplifying effect, but also has a strong hallucinogenic and addictive effect. Once consumed, it is difficult to completely get rid of this kind of energy. Powerful addiction. Edible effect, the eater's strength is permanently increased by 5%, one pill. During this period, the recovery effect is enhanced by 200%. But each time it is consumed, it will have a hallucinogenic effect that lasts for 10 minutes, and is accompanied by strong addiction. Interval between meals, 12 hours. Note, don't imagine that you will have super strong willpower to control your every move. In fact, you can't even quit shooting. Nice one. Looking at the notes on these black pills, Su Tong's eyes lit up. Even though it only increased the power by 5%, he noticed that it was permanent. In other words, after eating this thing, the increase in strength will still be retained even if you return to reality. There are at least 8 such small pills left in the glass bottle. If you eat them all, it means you can get a terrifying 40% increase. As if she noticed that Su Tong was very interested in her repulsive objects, Tana carefully moved her body closer and said in a seductive tone, "These are top quality goods, which can greatly increase your power. I will never lie to you, you can have a taste of it." It has to be said that Tana is not only a seductive beauty, but also a woman who is good at seizing opportunities. After encountering such an unexpected situation, in addition to initially appearing panicked, she also showed extraordinary behavior of calmness. She tried her best to lower her posture, and seemed to be twisting her body intentionally or unintentionally. Even with her big belly, it was still a different kind of temptation. It seems that the player who had a close fight with her before seems to have completely sunk into her gentle land. However, Tana's tried and tested abilities only gave her an iron fist full of justice. The sudden fist hit her face, breaking not only her face, but also the confidence and reserve that she was proud of. Before Tana could get up from the water, a strong electric current hit her again, causing her to float stiffly on the water, her body twitching unnaturally, and she kept spitting out big blisters one after another. "Please, please, what do you want? I can give it to you." Until the current gradually disappeared and she leaned weakly by the swimming pool. Tana was about to collapse. She didn't know what on earth this madman was going to do. Su Tong grabbed her hair and pulled her face closer to his. "Stop playing tricks with me. You have no so-called desire for reproduction at all. I am not that fool who can easily be manipulated by you. Tell me, what is the relationship between that fool just now and you?" The fool he was referring to was naturally the player who had just left. It seems that they have not been attacked by the infected here, and there may be problems that they are not aware of. In addition, what is the situation of the so-called Queen Mother? He wanted to get a reasonable answer to all the questions from this woman's mouth. Only then did Tana discover Su Tong's identity. Her pupils tightened and she said in surprise, "You are a human being." Snapped. The only thing that greeted her was Su Tong's loud mouth. "Answer my question." The cold voice had a bit of impatient tone, and did not give Tana any extra time to think. "The person you are talking about is the vassal Liang Hong. He is the vassal of number 8. There is another man whose name I don't know, but Liang Hong calls him the blood demon. Number 8 values their brothers very much and gave them the source virus. They are not humans or half-origin carriers. It turns out that the so-called vassalage is similar to the principle of vampires. They drank the blood of the original virus number 8, which is equivalent to half of the source virus. Not only will they gain a powerful increase, but they will no longer be attacked by the infected and evolved. And the stronger number 8 is, the stronger the increase they will get. If number 8 succeeds in becoming the new Queen Mother, they will even have a certain probability of advancing to become the source virus. But there are advantages and disadvantages. The amplifying effect of brain crystals has lost its effect on them. If number 8 dies, they, as vassals, are destined to die. Source virus. Su Tong frowned and thought about it, and couldn't help but think of the baby in Yan Niang's arms. He had seen Yan Niang feed the baby blood to drink. He thought that Yan Niang did this to feed the baby. Now I understand that the emotional doll is her vassal. As for the Mother Queen, according to Tana, all source viruses now cannot see the Mother Queen at all. The Queen Mother's lifespan is too short. From the moment the virus broke out to now, in less than half a month, she has already entered a period of decline and may die at any time. Before that, she won't meet anyone, and she won't look for a suitable successor until all the competitors carrying the source virus have arrived. No one knows what the conditions for a successor are, but everyone will bring their own tributes to please the Queen Mother. Please let me go, even for the sake of my child. Please, I'm just a tool to be used. Tana begged in a painful and weak voice, and straightened out her highly bulging belly. From time to time, the outline of a hand could be seen on his belly, sliding under his belly. While speaking, she glanced at Su Tong's legs standing on the steps, and slowly moved closer to him with a weak and pitiful expression. I beg you, I just want to take a look at my unborn child. As she said that, she stretched out her hand to hug his thigh. However, just when her hand was about to touch Su Tong's thigh, Su Tong suddenly squatted down and stared into her eyes. You still want to catch me in the water? Tana was stunned when her thoughts were revealed, and then a vicious cold light flashed across her eyes. The other two arms on her shoulders suddenly opened up, trying to pull Su Tong into the water. But how could Su Tong, who had seen through Tana's little thoughts, put himself in danger? The moment Tana grabbed her arm, an electric light hit her unceremoniously. The strengthened electric light hit Tana's body, causing her charming and sexy body to emit a pungent burnt smell. Tools must be useful. Since the Queen Mother's position is so important, I think those competitors who have just met you will be very jealous, so, please be prepared to be a tool person. As soon as he finished speaking, the big knife in Su Tong's hand suddenly swung up, and a black shadow swayed on the water. Puff! The dark red blood instantly dyed the huge swimming pool red. After about 10 minutes passed, a baby cried, and Su Tong walked out of the swimming pool with a baby in his arms. How ugly! Su Tong looked at the baby girl. Perhaps due to premature birth, her face was wrinkled, and the left side of her face was even covered with blisters. The baby never opened her eyes, but she could feel the little guy's weak breathing. Voice. He randomly found 2 blankets and wrapped her up, then took out milk powder and a bottle to brew for the baby and stuffed them into the little guy's mouth. It was a coincidence. Aunt Wang originally asked him to give these milk powder and bottles to the young woman upstairs, but the result can only be described as a human tragedy, let alone mention it. As for the doll, since Yan Niang fed her the original virus, of course these things were of no use and were just for the newborn girl. He already had a crazy plan in his mind, but he couldn't just keep this baby with him. After thinking about it for a while, he suddenly had an idea in his mind. After putting the baby aside temporarily, Su Tong began to search the mansion. Unfortunately, after searching around, he couldn't find the key to the helicopter on the roof. Since you can't find it, just give up on this alternative. However, there were quite a lot of fine wines and food in the kitchen in the mansion, and Su Tong naturally took all of these things away. After doing everything, he turned on the gas stove in the kitchen and opened the microwave oven at the same time. He summoned the big fat man and stuffed it into his stomach. He glanced back at the super mansion, and his eyes flashed with madness. Let's use this explosion to kick things off. After that, he quickly fled the scene of the murder. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 114. Boom. Accompanied by a huge rumble, the entire lair was soon alarmed. The building has a total of 68 floors. In the Sky Garden on the 50th floor, several candidates for the source virus were still discussing what the child in the belly of this woman, Tana, would look like. As a result, an explosion occurred on the roof of the building. Even though the fire after the explosion was not large, the thick smoke billowing straight into the sky like wolf smoke still made many evolutionists panic. It's a pity. In my impression, it seems to be a sky-high priced mansion. Wang Jiaming raised his head and could see the thick smoke clouds above them through the glass above his head. He couldn't help but feel a little regretful. Before he became the host of the source virus, he was a well-known real estate financing dealer in China and retained sporadic memories. Here, I still have a deep impression of this famous building and the super mansion on the top of the building. Mustache looked at him sideways and frowned. Let's get down to business, are you just going to give up like this? I don't think this guy number 8 can lead us to open up a new ethnic group. That's right, I'm not convinced. Chen Hai was resentful about this, thinking that number 8 was just lucky. Besides, Tana was pregnant before the virus broke out, and the child was not stillborn immediately. This was just a very low probability coincidence. After all, nothing has changed. A large number of infected people are quickly dying, and on the way here, he has discovered that there are people in the human team who have obtained enhancements and superpowers through brain crystals. And they are still rapidly gathering towards the east. This is what really worries them. Having once been humans, they knew very well that humans are too fertile and adaptable. Once they gain a foothold, the balance of victory will definitely tilt in their favor. But number 8 has no such considerations at all. His arrogant and domineering style is not at all like the magnanimity of a queen mother. While the three of them were talking, they suddenly saw number 8 hurriedly walking past them with a dark face. As they passed by, No 8's eyes glanced at the three of them intentionally or unintentionally, and their cold eyes immediately made the three of them feel their hearts beat. Especially Chen Hai, who was still talking bad things about number 8 just now, subconsciously avoided No 8's sharp gaze and lowered his head with a guilty conscience. It's weird, there's something wrong with No 8's face. Wang Jiaming looked at No 8's hurried away figure and suddenly had a bad feeling in his heart. Maybe his wife is dead. Chen Hai thought of the way number 8 looked at him just now, and suddenly he felt even more unhappy, and his words became cruel. Wang Jiaming frowned when he heard this, glanced at Chen Hai displeased, and turned around to leave. As he walked, he recited, "We are born from the same roots, so why rush?" Chen Hai was stunned when he heard this, and then cursed for a moment. "Hey, you son of a bitch, I've lost my heart for nothing." Mustache wanted to say something else, but after hearing what he said, his face suddenly darkened and he turned around and left. Now Chen Hai became even more annoyed. "Bah, what the hell, dare to think but dare not say, do you really think of yourself as a human being?" After saying that, he cursed angrily, "Where are my clothes?" An infected person hurriedly lowered his head to pick up the clothes from the clothes rack. As soon as he took off the clothes, he turned around and was almost hit by a fat man. There was a rustling sound on the sharp fine scales. After giving the fat man a fierce look, "Just send the clothes up quickly." Su Tong hid in his fat belly and looked at Chen Hai's back as he took the clothes and left angrily. He secretly chuckled in his heart and quickly left this land of right and wrong with the baby in his arms. When he rushed back to the human enclosure, he saw more than a dozen corpses in the open space of the enclosure. After all, there was no food to eat here, and many people had only half a breath left. After being tortured by the evolvers, they immediately burped on the spot. The corpse was doused with gasoline and burned together under the orders of the old man. The fire ignited the corpse, and many people couldn't help but subconsciously swallow as they looked at the fire burning in the flames. Some even stood up and wanted to get closer to the fire. Naturally, he was beaten back by the thugs under the magic stick. Looking at the blank faces under the fire, the old magic stick suddenly felt a little worried in his heart, because he knew that what was beaten back was the body, and what could not be beaten back was the floating body. People's hearts. What I'm afraid of is that after today, there will be a few more corpses in the dark corners behind. The old magic stick sighed, turned around and went back to his cave, pretending to be out of sight. As soon as he entered the cave, there was a familiar smell of cigars in the air, which immediately made the old magician's eyes light up. He couldn't help but take a deep breath, quickened his pace and took a closer look. He was surprised and said, "It is indeed you." Seeing Su Tong sitting on the chair waiting for him, the old magician's eyes lit up, and he immediately came over and took a deep breath in the smoke next to him, and his whole body became energetic. Apparently after tasting half of the cigar butt left by Su Tong, the old magician suddenly felt that most of his previous life had been in vain. If he was given another cigar like this, he would even die. He lifted his nose and sniffed fiercely, not caring whether it was second-hand smoke. Hi-ah, it feels so comfortable. After taking 2 deep breaths of the old magic stick, he sat down and asked Su Tong, "Is something wrong?" This old man was a thief, and when he opened his mouth, he didn't even ask him about the last time he disappeared out of thin air. There were some things that he should and shouldn't ask, and he was very clear in his mind. Su Tong nodded and pushed the bag that the fat man had used to carry in front of the old man. The old man hesitated for a moment, opened his bag and took a look. His face turned ugly. He quickly tied up his bag and shook his head at Su Tong. "No, no, you have seen my situation. Now those people outside have already. His eyes are so hungry that they are glowing green. If you leave this child alone, you might not be able to catch him at a glance and he will become a piece of meat in someone else's pot. Look at this child again. Is there any difference between him and ordinary children?" Seeing the old man's refusal, Su Tong was no exception and asked the old man to take a closer look at the baby. "No, the same." After hearing this, the old man opened the bag of his luggage and took the child out completely to take a closer look by the firelight. Huh. He looked at the baby carefully, and for a moment he let out a sound of surprise. He looked up at Su Tong, and when he was about to speak, he seemed to remember something. He quickly put the baby down carefully, stood up, and hurried out. You could vaguely hear the old man calling a few of his men outside the door, asking them to guard the entrance of the cave so that no one could come in. Then he hurried back and quickly held the child in his arms. Where did this child come from? Stealed. Su Tong did not hide the origin of the baby and simply told the old man Tana's situation. His. Taking a breath of cold air into his heart, the old man held the child in his arms and exclaimed, "A miracle, oh my, I smoked your cigar and I felt that the first half of my life was in vain. Only when I saw this child did I realize that I had learned a lifetime of biology is finally for this child." His face was full of melancholy. He had only 2 hobbies in his life, one was smoking and the other was studying biology. Who knew that just when the world was about to end, I would finally find the final answer to these 2 hobbies? How could this keep him from feeling melancholy? Is there any way you can take this child and leave? Looking at the child, the old man thought for a moment, and then said to Su Tong seriously, "This child is really special. Maybe she can really create a new ethnic group. If possible, take it away from here and find me student, Li Zhengqing, he is my best student, maybe he can crack the secret of this child." Side Mission 4, Looking for Li Zhengqing. Mission description: Professor Li Zhengqing is on his way to the east to search for antibodies. If everything goes well, there may be a chance of finding him in the east. After the old man finished speaking, the mission reminder sounded in his ears. Li Zhengqing. Su Tong was stunned for a moment. He had never heard of this name, but on the way here, there seemed to be several people wearing white coats in the team with the 2 players he met. The middle-aged man who stopped me at that time was called a professor. It can't be such a coincidence. But Su Tong decisively rejected the old man's proposal. Maybe it would not be difficult for him to leave the nest now, but now is not the time. Moreover, this baby is the most important part of his plan. The story he prepared has just begun. How could he leave right now? Seeing his refusal, the old man had no choice but to reluctantly agree to help him take care of the child first. Su Tong left all the milk powder and some food supplies as a reward for the old man. And, of course, a full cigar. After he left the enclosure, Su Tong took out the bone flute Yan Niang had given him, put it to his mouth and played it. After about a while, I saw the doll flying over from a distance, flapping its wings, its head looking left and right, as if looking for traces of Su Tong. However, When seeing Big Fat, Dao's expression was obviously a little strange. It wasn't until his voice came out of Big Fat's belly that Dao was able to confirm his identity. Take me to Yan Niang. Let the baby lead the way, and let Big Fatty follow behind, following the baby all the way to Yan Niang's location. Surprisingly, I thought that Yan Niang, the source of the virus, would have the same luxurious residence as number 8 and the others, but I didn't expect that Yan Niang's place of residence would be extremely crude. At first glance, it looks like a run-down house with no windows. Yan Niang seemed surprised when she saw the fat man appearing in front of her, but she quickly signaled the baby to guard outside and led Su Tong into the room. When she was about to speak, Su Tong had already spoken before her. You are lying to me. The cold questioning voice made Yan Niang stunned for a moment. Give me some compensation, or we will terminate our cooperation. Su Tong poked his head out of his fat belly, his eyes flashing coldly. Don't try to excuse anything, because you had no intention of letting me leave this place alive in the first place. Damn place. Infinite script killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 115. Silence. The room suddenly became eerily quiet. The two people's eyes met, and the cold light flashing in their eyes from time to time was both a confrontation and a test of each other. Just as she didn't know what Su Tong understood, Su Tong didn't know whether her actions would push the two to the point of completely breaking up. But he had to do this. Since the source virus can have the ability to develop vassals, why didn't Yan Niang make herself his vassal? Wouldn't that be simpler and less troublesome? So when she said she was going to be sent in as a tribute, it seemed like she really planned to dedicate herself to that lovely Queen Mother. Perhaps she could argue that this was to facilitate her actions, or she could give a more appropriate reason. But he doesn't believe Yan Niang now. He hid such information and threw himself into a pen. No matter how reasonable the excuse is, he will not believe her now. If she becomes Queen Mother, it is even less clear whether she will be able to obtain the benefits she mentioned. I don't have anything suitable to compensate you now. Yan Niang shook her head. Then let me go. Su Tong turned around and asked Big Fatty to take him away. He left decisively without any hesitation. The fat figure flickered and disappeared, and walked out of the room the next moment. When he was quickly gone away, Yan Niang had no intention of chasing him out. Seeing this, Su Tong didn't take it to heart because he was in a hurry to rush to the opening ceremony of the next play. Until Su Tong disappeared from her sight, the baby in her arms let out a low strange cry, as if asking Yan Niang why she didn't catch up to him and tell him the truth. Forget it, so what if you tell him? Cracks can never be repaired with your mouth. There were some words that she couldn't explain or even say. Once she said them, she would be killed. When Su Tong arrived at the hanging garden, the flames above the garden had gone out. But the evolvers who served as source viruses were all frightened and even wanted to escape from this place. As the building's elevator doors slowly opened, a body was laid out in a garden bed. From a distance, Su Tong finally saw the two players head-on for the first time. Except for Liang Hong, who was as strong as an ox, there was another person standing in the shadows, his black cloak covering his face. His body was tightly hidden inside, and his true face could not be seen at all. If nothing else goes wrong, this mysterious person should be the other player Tana mentioned, Blood Demon. The two of them stood behind number 8 without saying a word, but it could be seen that Liang Hong's face was extremely ugly. I believe that at this moment he was not only angry about Tana's death, but also worried that he would not be able to survive. What should I do when my drug addiction relapses next time? Everything was quiet. In the corner, Mustache, Wang Jiaming, Chen Hai and several other hosts of the source virus are all there, but it is obvious that Chen Hai is a bit isolated standing there. I don't know if it's because of the original host, but Chen Hai always has a bad mouth. At this time, it is undoubtedly a wise move for everyone to keep a distance from him silently. On the flower bed, The beauty who had made a shining appearance just a few hours ago was now a pile of rotten flesh, with a huge gash on her head, and the brain crystals inside had disappeared. But the focus of people's concern was not this, but the missing child in her belly. The palm of his hand covered with black leather gloves slowly placed his hand on Tana's body, and his hand gently caressed Tana's body. As if caressing a piece of art, his eyes sparkled with tenderness, as if the woman lying in the flowerbed was the true love of his heart. Dear Tana, I have always believed that you are that miraculous oasis in the desert. I brought you out from that remote corner. I hope that the dazzling light can illuminate our tribe and ignite the hope of life. No-8's gentle and hoarse voice sounded like a nomadic poet. With his focused expression, no one would doubt his feelings for Tana. After I become the new Queen Mother, you should get the same position as me, because the child in your belly is destined to be my next successor. Ah! As soon as No-8's voice fell, a disdainful snort suddenly came from the quiet garden. Even though the voice was very small, everyone looked at Chen Hai in unison. Wang Jiaming and Mustache decisively chose to stay away from this guy. Other source virus hosts are no exception. After all, everyone knows that the baby in Tana's belly may be a new shortcut. Now that Tana has been killed, the whereabouts of the child are unknown. What's even more troublesome is that everyone is suspected. Whoever would anger number 8 at this time would undoubtedly be the stupidest thing to do. Number 8 suddenly raised his head, his eyes burning with madness and rage. It was obvious that he didn't like Chen Hai interrupting his thoughts at this time. Chen Hai felt uncomfortable with the squinting glances from everyone, and he felt evil fire in his heart. He said disdainfully, "Why, he is not the Queen Mother yet. He is starting to plan for the next Queen Mother now. What if he becomes the Queen Mother, Your Majesty? Don't you even have to make arrangements for your grandson to take over? Anyway, Tana's murder had nothing to do with him, so didn't he even have the right to say a word? Some people are the kind of people who will fight to the death if they are caught doing something. Chen Hai is obviously like this." "Shut up." Seeing that this guy wanted to continue talking, Wang Jiaming finally couldn't help but stepped forward and pulled his arm, signaling him to stop talking. Number 8 retracted his gaze and stared at Tana's body in front of him again. His palm caressed her cheek, his focused gaze was like that of the affectionate lover in the poem, until his palm touched Tana's chest along her belly. The tenderness on his face gradually began to solidify, and his face turned from pale to red, and finally turned into livid eyes, but his eyes shone with a crazy and dangerous light. This was definitely not a good sign. "But, you ruined everything." The angry roar seemed to hit the empty chest many times before coming out again, making people feel that the whole world was darkened. At the same time, fierce black flames exploded in his palm, instantly turning Tana's body into white bones. With a crackling sound, every bone was burned into ashes. The terrifying aura was like a devil coming out of hell, and Sutong, who was hiding in his fat belly, furrowed his brows. Chen Hai, who looked indifferent just now, was even more livid. As the host of the same source virus, No-8's evolutionary direction is completely to run in the direction of battle. The terrifying aura rushes in, making people deeply feel the word despair in their minds. He glanced at everyone like a wolf, "No matter who it is, hand over the child, and I guarantee that he will die more comfortably." Number 8 focused his attention on several competitors, but directly ignored the idiot Chen Hai. In his mind, a stupid pig like Chen Hai seemed to be too deeply influenced by the host. His mind was full of tofu and he simply didn't have the guts to do this. Wang Jiaming took a step back, cleared his throat and explained, "Number 8, I understand your mood, but this matter." "Shut up, isn't it you?" Number 8, who was extremely angry, was obviously not interested in listening to Wang Jiaming's nonsense, and asked sternly, like a vicious dog ready to attack at any time. Wang Jiaming's pupils immediately shrank, and an evil fire flashed under his eyes, but this angry emotion appeared like a dragonfly on water and then quickly disappeared. He closed his eyes and shook his head. It's not me. Number 8 turned his eyes and looked at Mustache. Following Wang Jiaming's example, Mustache denied it more neatly. On the side, Chen Hai saw the two people's sincere attitude. He curled his lips and took off his coat. He was about to have a glass of fresh blood and slowly enjoy the show. Ding dong. A necklace slipped from the pocket of the coat and landed on the marble at his feet, making a crisp sound. What's this? Chen Hai reached out and picked up the necklace. He was wondering that he didn't have this thing. He didn't even notice that No 8's cold eyes were locked on him. It's him. The moment Liang Hong, who was standing behind number 8, saw the necklace, his eyes sparkled and he pointed with his hand. He is the murderer. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 116. Is it him? Of course not. This necklace was exactly what Su Tong had thrown into Chen Hai's pocket when he was asking someone to get his clothes. Just in case, there is a little paper figure inside to ensure that the necklace will fall out of his pocket at the right time. He believed that Liang Hong, who was addicted to drugs, would immediately recognize this necklace that he cherished so much. Sure enough, Liang Hong did live up to expectations and was even better than he expected. Pointing at the necklace on Chen Hai's hand, he screamed. No. Not me. Chen Hai was startled and suddenly remembered that Tana seemed to be wearing such a necklace on her chest, but the moment he finished speaking, his eyes were already shrouded in black firelight. Like a whirlwind, leaving black flames in the air, No 8's arms instantly swelled, and a lion-like head extended from his arms, spitting out black flames, and opened his mouth to bite it off. Chen Hai's pupils immediately shrank, his left hand twisted quickly, and several huge tentacles stabbed diagonally like a poisonous snake spitting out a message. They are both the source virus host, but the difference is also exposed at this moment. Number 8 did not dodge or dodge, letting the tentacles strike at his body. His skin, flesh, and clothes immediately shattered with a loud noise, but the huge head bit hard on Chen Hai's shoulder. Amidst Chen Hai's painful wails, most of his shoulder was torn off, and the torn flesh and blood emitted light yellow smoke and creaked as it was burned by black fire. But it wasn't over yet. The huge impact knocked him 5 or 6 meters away in the air. Boom! During the fall, Chen Hai's body made many close contacts with the hard steps and raised walls. At least 70 or 80 bones were broken all over his body. The torn left shoulder seemed to have disappeared out of thin air, and his arms were all broken off. In contrast, apart from No 8's torn clothes, the flesh and blood that had just been torn apart had actually healed quickly. Chen Hai, who was vomiting blood, noticed the footsteps behind him, turned around with difficulty, looked at number 8 who was walking in front of him, and seemed to use all his strength to spit out a bloody arrow. You. Number 8 ducked sideways and saw a blood arrow hitting the stone wall on the side, opening a large hole. Looking at Chen Hai with cold eyes, he slowly raised the lion-like head on his arm. We come from the same origin, and my mother is also your mother. Chen Hai was startled when he heard this, and looked at Xiaohu and the others. He finally understood why every time he finished cursing, there was no one around him. It seemed that only then did he come to his senses. Oh, no wonder. Boom! Black fire instantly enveloped Chen Hai's head, burning his flesh into ashes. Click! Number 8 stepped down on the head that had only white bones left, crushing its skull into pieces. With his other black-gloved palm, he took out a small red crystal from the fragments. No wonder you are so stupid. It turns out that your source virus only has this little bit. After speaking, he pinched his fingers. Boom! Suddenly this brain crystal-like thing was crushed in an instant. Number 8, you have gone too far. Chen Hai cannot be the murderer, Wang Jiaming said solemnly, looking at Chen Hai's body on the ground. Chen Hai is not the murderer, number 8 knows it very well, but so what, does he care? You all know he is not, and no one is helping him, right? I'll give you this favor. Find the child, otherwise I will kill him until I am the only heir left. Everyone's expressions turned cold. No one expected such a result. Medicine, medicine. Liang Hong walked quickly to Chen Hai's body, tremblingly picked up the necklace on the ground, held it in his hand, but before he could open the necklace, number 8 snatched it away. Idiot, you won't get anything until you find the child. After hearing No 8's words, Liang Hong was stunned for a moment. When he turned around and wanted to say something else, his shoulders sank and he saw the blood demon's hand on his shoulder, shaking his head to signal him not to say any more. A large number of evolvers began to search desperately in the nest. But the nest is always the Mother Queen's nest. As the host of the source virus, they can only be regarded as successors, and they are far from being able to command all evolvers. To put it bluntly, they are not qualified to mobilize even those infected outside. The power that can be mobilized is destined to be limited. Su Tong was not in a hurry. Anyway, he was hiding in the fat belly. As long as he didn't jump out actively, no one would notice him. He simply wandered around the lair and treated it as a visit. As long as the child cannot be found for a long time, I believe that number 8, the knife hanging over the heads of other competitors, will definitely break out the internal strife. The other end was in a ruins, and the ranger looked at the town in the distance with a grimace. He took out a bottle of water from the prop book and drank it in one gulp. Uncle, how far do we have to go? Zhang Qiang pulled Xiao Chenzi up from below, looked at the inconspicuous town in the distance, and couldn't help but ask in a low voice. How would I know? The ranger responded angrily, cursing this damn identity mission in his heart. He just said that he was going all the way east, but after walking for so long, he couldn't find any trace. The ranger's roar startled Zhang Qiang, and his eye circles suddenly turned red. Upon seeing this, the corner of the ranger's mouth twitched a few times, and he could only slow down his tone, trying to calm down his irritable mood. Keep on holding on, I think we should be there soon. After comforting the child Zhang Qiang, the ranger called out his prop book, and his face became even more ugly. This time he entered the script world and brought more than 500 script points. As a result, in order to escape with these two children along the way, most of the script points in hand have been consumed. At this time, he felt so painful. This was simply a completely endless marathon, and he didn't even gain a little bit along the way. Completely became the nanny of these two children. Just take a rest here and I'll go see if there are any cars or anything around. The ranger pointed to the earthen cave on the side and motioned for the two of them to hide inside and take a rest. He also moved a few big rocks to block the entrance of the cave. Only then did I feel relieved. Uncle. At this time, Zhang Qiang called the ranger through the cracks in the rocks, and saw a pair of black and white eyes looking at him under the cracks. We are waiting for you to come back. Looking at the eyes under the cracks in the stone, the ranger nodded guiltily, and then he quickly ran away. His figure shuttled through the fields, and kept running forward. He didn't know what he was going to do. He just wanted to leave these two boys far behind him and give himself a little breathing room. It wasn't until he ran into a woods that he frantically vented all the anger in his heart. You damn space, I obviously chose the bad guy. Why did I take these two children to find the so-called protected area? Shouldn't I kill them and escape on my own? His fist hit the tree trunk hard, and he was so angry that he almost went crazy. Repeating the curse just now, he punched one after another until the tree as big as a bowl was broken. Accompanied by the rumble of the falling trees, the ranger seemed to vent all the evil in his chest and sat down on the ground, breathing heavily. He lit a cigarette in his hand, and after taking a long puff, his eyes swayed from side to side on the way back and forward. After a while, as if he had made up his mind, he threw the cigarette butt on the ground, stood up and disappeared into the woods in front of him without looking back. The night is getting darker and darker. The two children hiding in the hole looked at the night outside, curled up tightly, and waited uneasily. At this time, Zhang Qiang suddenly felt that Xiao Chenzi's body began to have a fever again, his body curled up together, and his teeth trembled up and down. Seeing this, Zhang Qiang quickly wrapped Xiao Chenzi in his own clothes and hugged him tightly. "Hold on, uncle will be back soon." Xiao Chenzi nodded reluctantly, completely speechless. At this moment, rustling footsteps suddenly came from outside. The sound was not loud, but it was heard very clearly in this wilderness. Zhang Qiang's eyes lit up, but he did not dare to open his mouth to call out to Uncle Ranger. Instead, he covered Xiao Chenzi's trembling mouth and stared outside the crack in the stone. After experiencing so much along the way, even children will understand the dangers of being in the wild. Fortunately, the rustling footsteps got farther and farther, and Zhang Qiang finally breathed a sigh of relief. "I don't know what the footsteps are, but as long as it's not Uncle Ranger, it's definitely not a good thing." The wind blew loudly outside, and time passed by. Seeing Xiao Chenzi's body shaking more and more, Zhang Qiang began to feel anxious. "My stomach began to growl unsatisfactorily, and I looked out through the cracks in the rocks. It was still dark outside and there was nothing. Uncle, where are you?" In his heart, he expected the figure of the ranger to appear in his field of vision as soon as possible, but he didn't notice it at all. Xiao Chenzi was lying behind him, and he didn't know when he opened his eyes. Two green eyes were staring directly at Zhang Qiang's neck. A bright red tongue licked the corners of his lips. He swallowed hard and stretched out his palms towards him. Infinite script killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 117. Ah! A sudden scream caused the ranger's expression to change. He immediately accelerated towards the pit and opened the stone in front of him. He saw Zhang Qiang covering his arm, tears welling up in his eyes. Upon seeing this, the ranger felt relieved and frowned. "What are you shouting for? Call those infected people over, and you too will reap the benefits." Zhang Qiang nodded aggrievedly, pointed to Xiao Chenzi beside him and said, "He was so burned that he bit my arm while he was holding it. You see, my arm was bleeding from the bite." He rolled up his sleeves, and the ranger took a closer look, and saw that there was indeed a tooth mark with a little blood on Zhang Qiang's arm, but after careful inspection, he found nothing wrong. It was just a bit of skin breakage and some bleeding, but nothing serious. The ranger looked at Xiao Chenzi again, and suddenly felt guilty. He was only thinking about lighting the fire and cooking, and ignored the time for a while, forgetting that Xiao Chenzi needed to take medicine every night. He touched the little guy's forehead with his hand and was surprised to find that the child's fever had subsided and his breathing had returned to normal. This discovery surprised the ranger. But no matter what, everything was safe at last. He took out the roasted grouse from the props book and said, "After searching for a long time, I found a grouse. I'll roast it for you on the spot. Eat quickly." As he spoke, he pushed Xiao Chenzi to wake up. After Xiao Chenzi woke up, he rubbed his eyes first, and then his eyes suddenly lit up when he saw the chicken legs handed over by the ranger. He picked them up and started to gnaw them. It's strange to say that Xiao Chenzi doesn't have a good appetite. Every time he eats something symbolic, today's appetite is suddenly whetted. It's surprisingly good. After eating one chicken drumstick, it's not enough. He eats most of the other half. All the grouse had eaten them clean. This frightened the ranger, and he quickly pulled him to check carefully, fearing that the little guy was terminally ill and had recovered from his illness. But after confirming that there was really nothing wrong with this little guy, the ranger felt relieved. Let them finish eating and then take them on the road in a hurry. The moon is full at night, and it seems that after there is no human noise, the night sky begins to show stars. Zhang Jiang, who was tired from walking, fell asleep on the back of the ranger, with irritation flowing down his collar. The ranger couldn't wipe it off because he was still holding Xiao Chenzi, who was sleeping, in his arms. It seems that the farther east they went, the fewer and fewer infected people they met on the road. By the time it got slightly brighter, the ranger was already exhausted. But when he passed through a vegetable field, he vaguely heard there seemed to be some noise from the front. The ranger's eyes suddenly lit up, and he hurriedly accelerated his pace, quickly catching up to the source of the sound in front of him, and the sound became clearer and clearer. By the time he walked through the vegetable patch, he could hear every word clearly. If you are a survivor, please wait at the station on the left. A shuttle bus will escort you into the survivor camp at 12 noon every day. The source of the sound was coming from the roadside station. The ranger walked over and took a look. It turned out that there was a large speaker hanging above the station, playing in a loop. Found it, ha 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 ha. In an instant, a strong sense of accomplishment exploded in Ranger's heart. Putting down Xiao Chenzi, he pulled Zhang Jiang, the bastard, from his back into his hands, raised it above his head and shook it. Wake up, you little bastard, we are here, we found it, ha ha ha. Zhang Jiang, who woke up from being shaken, hadn't had enough sleep yet. He didn't wake up until he heard the ranger's excited roar. Uncle? Are we here? He looked around in confusion, until he heard the loop playing clearly on the speakers, and then he screamed with excitement. The ranger kissed the little guy hard on the face, and then lifted Xiao Chenzi beside him in the air and spun him around in a big circle, and then he calmed down from the excitement. He quickly took out a lot of delicious things to feed the two little guys. The three of them sat on chairs at the station, eating while waiting for the bus to pick them up. During this period, Zhang Jiang curiously asked about the survivor camp. Faced with the child's innocent eyes, Yuxia didn't know how to refuse. What's more, he was in a good mood at this time, so naturally he was full of nonsense when he spoke. The description of the survivor camp was so good that Zhang Jiang's eyes were filled with stars. Uncle, when we get to the camp, can I be with you? Suddenly Zhang Jiang asked. The ranger was stunned for a moment and scratched his head. I'm very good. I can wash clothes, cook, and, anyway, don't let me go. Seeing Zhang Jiang's tears about to roll down as he spoke, Yuxia curled his lips and thought to himself, you are a chicken, and apart from crying, you are also good at eating. However, he still patted the child's head and said reluctantly, it depends on the situation. If the camp doesn't care about it, I won't let you go hungry. I knew my uncle was the best to me. Zhang Jiang put his head close to him, and no matter whether it was snot or tears, it was all smeared on the ranger's clothes. Compared to the intimate attitude between Zhang Jiang and Yuxia, Xiao Chenzi seemed very indifferent. In fact, he spent most of the time sleeping along the way. As long as there is no danger, the ranger will put it on his back and let him sleep on his back. Occasionally he will wake up to rush on his way, eat something, and basically let Zhang Jiang finish what he can say. So in comparison, Yuxia has put a lot of effort into him, but in terms of relationship, he is still stronger with Zhang Jiang. It wasn't until 12:30 noon that a heavily armed bus slowly approached. A group of heavily armed soldiers got out of the bus and carefully checked the three people. After confirming that there was nothing wrong with them, they took them to sit in the bus. Superior. There were not just the three of them in the car, there were several other survivors. After asking around, the ranger found out that it was still a full day's journey from the survivors' camp. This can only be regarded as an outpost, but even though it is an outpost, the infected people in this area have basically been eliminated. Ranger and the others could sit comfortably in the chairs and have a good sleep. He was really exhausted during this period. Thinking that he was about to arrive at the survivor camp, he felt extremely relaxed. He lay down on the chair and fell asleep, without forgetting to mutter, "Damn, it's so hard to be a good person." It was just his words that made Xiaoqinzi stunned for a moment. He looked sideways at the sleeping ranger, and the expression on his face gradually became weird. The plump big buttocks swayed with a brisk rhythm, and the harmless big face looked particularly unusual in the eyes of some evolutionists. Some evolutionists even approached suspiciously and sniffed carefully, but no matter how they sniffed, they couldn't find anything suspicious about Big Fat's body. Coupled with the fat, flexible, and slender tentacles, the evolvers couldn't find any doubts and could only watch this guy's figure flickering away step by step. Is the Big Fat disguise perfect? Of course not. If you are in a sunny place and the light shines on you, you will immediately reveal your true colors. But the question is, where does the sunlight come from in the nest? There were some weak beams of light refracted in, or some insects that were glowing with light fluorescence. So in this place, I don't need to worry about being discovered at all. Ding ding ding. Fragmented knocking sounds came from the end of the corridor. Su Tong walked over and relied on his powerful dark vision to see the huge shadow in front of him. His pupils tightened and the shadow gradually became clear. It turned out to be a huge statue. The statue seems to be unfinished, but its huge body still gives people an unprecedented sense of shock. A bald head is lying on it, carving carefully, but his lower body has an octopus-like body. The exquisite and delicate tentacles seem to exist just to carve the stone statue. The slender tentacles are covered with sharp teeth, which can penetrate into any gap in the statue and carefully polish any dead corner. The upper half of the bald head is completely like a human body. He squinted his eyes and carefully carved every detail on it. He nodded with satisfaction after making sure that there were no problems. Huh. At this time, the bald head suddenly noticed the fat man standing below. Seeing his stupid look, he frowned and said, "Do you understand you?" The fat man shook his head. The bald man climbed down from the statue, took a closer look at the big fat man, and couldn't help frowning. How come the quality of today's evolvers is getting worse and worse, and a fool has evolved? After saying that, he picked up the bucket beside him and started drinking heavily. Su Tong hid in the big fat belly and raised his face to take a look. A pungent smell hit him, and his heart moved. Gasoline. Bang. After the bald man drank up the bucket of gasoline, he threw the bucket aside casually, with a hint of drunkenness on his face. He pointed at his brilliant masterpiece in front of him and said proudly, "This is the Queen Mother 9 Sun." The magnificent statue in front of him is the true form of the Queen Mother, and the so-called 9 Suns are exactly 9 human-like figures standing under the true form of the Queen Mother. Su Tong looked carefully and found that these 9 people had neither faces nor sexual organs. But each of them has a red gem set on their forehead. Hey, isn't it weird? Why don't they have faces? Because they don't have faces in the first place. When the queen comes out of the door at the back, these heads will explode, so there is no need for faces. The bald head pointed behind the statue, and Su Tong looked around. After looking carefully for a long time, he finally saw an arch that looked like a chrysanthemum. Seeing that the bald head seemed to be a little drunk, he raised his voice and imitated the fat man's tone of voice and asked, "Why, the explosion?" The bald man looked disgusted. He held another barrel of gasoline in his arms and drank a few gulps before saying, "Explosion is art." As early as 5 years ago, before the Queen Mother woke up, she split into 9. The source virus lurks in the brains of human hosts through various methods. After the Queen wakes up, they will be awakened and then become the source of the spread of the virus. The bald hand kept gesticulating, perhaps because he was too lonely, and he was eager to tell others about his excellent ideas. After saying that, he came over with a mysterious look on his face, burped, and whispered, "Let me tell you a secret quietly. Each source virus only has one chance to be released. There is still one source virus that has not been released yet.